Hey, this is Daniel.
I'm Noel, and this is the Quick Philosophy Question Podcast.
Or QPQ for short.
A podcast dedicated to bettering your understanding of philosophy.
Okay guys, so this is our first podcast and we're going to be talking about what is philosophy and why it's important.
We're going to have a super brief introduction on what the origins of philosophy are and what it's defined as. And we know this is a super broad topic, it's really ambitious, but we're just going to do our best to cover it as fully and as accessibly as we can.
Yeah, because this is just for, you guys and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. So, do you want to start with your summary?
I feel like origins of philosophy is a good way to go first.
Okay. So, philosophy for the most part originated from Greece. And for our purposes today, they're basically the pre-Socratic thinkers and the Socratic thinkers, with the former dealing more in cosmological questions like what causes solar eclipses, where do natural things originate from, etc. And the latter beginning to deal with questions of ethics and social studies, questions like what is justice, what is virtue. So the leading pre-Socratic thinker was Thales of Menetius, and one of his most famous ideas had to do with the belief that all natural things come from water. And then as one might have guessed, the first Socratic thinker was Socrates, and some of his ideas had to do with the question of what is perceived reality and what is real reality. So yeah.
Very deep.
Very deep.
Yeah. It's interesting to see someone be so prominent in philosophy that they get a whole part of philosophy named after himself, Socratic method.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna discuss what is philosophy. To give a quick rundown on what the definition of philosophy is, it comes from the word philo, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. Right? So basically the definition of the word philosophy is love of wisdom, which is very telling. So philosophy also uses very specific language to convey the concepts and thoughts, because usually it can get really dense and complicated in a lot of different ways. So when we're talking through this podcast, we might not use the best language to explain our concept. We'll try our best, but we won't use our best, but whatever.
Most concise.
So so that is the definition of philosophy from that part. Philosophy also covers a wide range of topics, so the philosophy of mathematics, the philosophy of science, the philosophy of language, so on and so forth. So since this was one of the very beginnings of thought and how people thought about stuff, it usually covers just knowledge in general. So speculative philosophy delved deeper into scientific stuff, and Newton was thought to be a speculative philosopher during his time, or a naturalist in a sense.
Pre-Socratic thinkers.
Amazing. So that's what science used to be back then. So now it's just more general. But the important thing, the two definitions that I found for what is philosophy generally is the thinking of thinking, to expand your thoughts on how thinking should happen and how you should think to achieve different things. And another one by Gilles Deleuze, which is the art of concept creation, where philosophy is just creating ideas in a sense to satisfy certain means for whatever that certain philosopher and in the context of that society. So the main philosophical method though is analysis, which is inspection and definition and clearly defining terms, because that's very important when you're trying to discuss a topic.
You got stuck with the hard question because it's an age-old question, what is philosophy? But
what is philosophy? But hopefully I did well.
I think it's pretty good. Okay. So now we just have a couple of questions relating to this topic that will provide more context. And
And to begin, we are going to talk about why we should study philosophy.
Yeah.
And why it's important. So, Noel, any thoughts?
Yeah, so we're going to start with the social benefits of studying philosophy, right? So I think you were talking about like social contract theory at some point, which is kind of like the idea, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's like kind of the idea that like you do certain things in order to better your position in society.
Yeah, like social contract theory, from how I understand it anyways, is where you as an individual have certain interests, and it's in your benefit to work as a society to achieve those interests.
I see. Yeah, so that's one way that philosophy influences your benefits your social life.
Yeah, like defining why we should care for other people and how we should care for other people.
Yeah.
What is left, such like that.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. I think philosophy, it benefits you socially because, well, obviously when you think philosophically, you like figure things out kind of. People value that in society. People value truth and knowledge. So, yeah.
Yeah, truth and knowledge is really important for like our day and age because like it's important to think about it from like a point where both people can understand something, a concept, and so we can both like discuss on stuff. Like that's really important.
There's like you have to have common ground for being good socially.
Yeah.
And philosophy helps you achieve that because everyone can relate to philosophy.
Also, it helps you win arguments. So I mean, like
love manipulation. 10 out of 10. Okay.
Amazing.
And yeah, we were also talking about how philosophy benefits you personally.
And this is like really important because like philosophy helps you analyze stuff to the point where it helps you make better decisions to achieve your own interests.
Well, that goes into ethics.
Well, yeah, it goes into ethics, but I mean like just the study of philosophy in itself helps you think about things more rationally, which can also help you achieve different things even though they're not necessarily philosophical concepts.
Yeah, I was reading an article. It said like philosophy students are just way better at like critical thinking and analyzing things and judgments. But I'd say that's kind of like the collateral personal benefits of studying philosophy. Like, what would you say are some of like the direct intellectual, like philosophical benefits of thinking?
I'd say that it helps you like introduce a form of thinking that is clear and consistent, because if you don't have consistent thinking or a consistent philosophy in different things, it's hard to discuss with other people, and you just get influenced in ways that you might not necessarily want to, right? So if you completely understand your thinking in one topic, it's easier to extrapolate to other topics based upon those thinkings.
For sure.
And it also helps you lead a less stressful life, I believe.
Would you say studying philosophy makes you a better person?
Ooh, really hard question there, because like I've been thinking about this for some time actually before. It's like there's parts of philosophy that can be really cool to study to better yourself and different parts of that, but also studying philosophy can make you mentally distance from these topics.
Yeah.
So philosophy by itself might not just be like helpful, but using philosophy,
like not inherently helpful.
Yeah, it's not inherently helpful. Good way to put it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because there are definitely cons to studying philosophy. Like you can, like this cliche stereotype is like philosophical thinkers all go crazy, and yeah. Well, also here's another question. Like, do you think it is enough? Do you think it is enough for one person to study philosophy and become a better person and have them be able to influence everyone else, or do you think philosophy needs to be adopted universally in order to affect change? In order to
affect change, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely not how I say it.
I'd say that philosophy is important for an individual if they really want to see the things that they want to see get done. Because it's like, to convince someone else, you have to understand them and reason your way through stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you personally want to see a different world, it's good for you to study philosophy. But if when you're talking about if it's universally should be accepted, that's talking about like epistemic responsibility, which is just trying to define
What exactly?
exactly.
Epistemic
It's just trying to define why knowledge is not only your responsibility but a responsibility of others, because what you believe affects what other people believe.
I see.
So it's your responsibility as part of a society to question your own thoughts and develop them to the point where you believe they're sound.
I see. So yeah, right. There's also like the effect, like kind of like a domino effect of like one person. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on why we should study philosophy?
On why we should study philosophy socially? Well, I think one of the really important points is like the common ground argument. Like philosophy is something that, again, like everyone can relate to, everyone can access, and like that's how fundamental it is, I guess. Like it's just it's something that's necessary to society because it is a way of connecting everyone, and it's also a way of keeping society like a thing. Like that's how right, like that's how like all powering it is. But yeah, how would you say, what do you think it's someone's duty to study philosophy, someone's moral duty?
Again, going back to epistemic responsibility, I think it's like their responsibility to do that as part of a society.
Yeah. What about personally, as applied to?
Personally, I wouldn't say that.
I guess it's kind of hard to separate, like, personally versus socially. But like hypothetically, if you could study philosophy like absolutely personally, like it wouldn't influence
anyone else.
Yeah, society in any way.
Well, I'd say that studying philosophy brings up analyzing and stuff like that can help you achieve your own interests and your own goals. So even if studying philosophy directly doesn't help you,
I have questions.
You have questions. Let's go.
Like from what I'm hearing, what we're saying, like all of the personal benefits of studying philosophy are like side effects. Like you get better at critical thinking, you get better at analysis, and all of the inherent effects go to the social aspect. Do you think like that's valuable in it? Because that would point to the fact that like studying philosophy does not inherently benefit you personally. Its only effects are like carried out in your social interactions. Well,
I'd say that that's not necessarily true, because in the sense that studying philosophy helps you question your own knowledge to the point where it helps you make better decisions for yourself.
I see. So that is one inherent
property of philosophy.
Think about it, and it's like making better decisions for yourself. What would be a decision like that doesn't have to do with society? I mean, I guess maybe like eating healthy.
Yeah.
Would have to do, but
or eating, pie. I don't know why I was gonna say pie, but I mean like if you really want pie, like studying ways to get that is important.
Yeah, but that is a little too ambitious of a question though, because like it's hard to disentangle society from literally anything. So
amazing. You're part of that society and whatnot.
Yeah.
So what are the dangers of philosophy though?
Dangers of studying philosophy. Well, again, philosophy is not inherently good. Like there are obviously inherent like fundamental dangers of studying philosophy, and then there are the ones where like either you study it incorrectly, I'd say. That's kind of cautiously, but but you study it like like you approach it incorrectly, or you study I'll finish that thought later. But what do you think? Do you think philosophy is always inherently true? That's a loaded question. Like, do you think there's ways to have fraudulent philosophy?
That's a really deep question, actually. Because it's like,
hell yeah.
What would you define as fraudulent in that sense?
It's created with ulterior motives. It's created without the intention of the pursuit of wisdom and truth.
True. Like, for example, hopefully this doesn't offend anyone. For example, stuff in capitalism and whatnot can, like, the development of ideas in that sense can be like...
Well, because, I was just thinking about how information, because philosophy is, in a sense, information, and I was thinking about how, the dangers of information, and that's how, that's how the thought of, like, fraudulence came up.
Well, I'd say
like, do you think it ceases to become philosophy when it is fraudulent? Like, it's only philosophy when it's true?
Well, see, like, if it has fraudulent information, right, then the premises aren't strong in that sense. Like, the philosophy of what it's based upon is not strong. But if it's, like, the intent of developing that philosophy, like, politically, like, left or right or whatever, like, is meant to achieve a certain purpose or a certain goal that is independent of wisdom gaining or for that individual person, then it's like... Then it's still, like, introducing a certain kind of thinking and a thought process, and even though the intent might not necessarily be the same, it's still a valid one that we can still criticize in a sense. Right. So,
but that, that assumes that there is skepticism,
true.
Which is not always necessarily true. But do you want to leave that for now and move on to our next question,
which is the future?
The future, why you should study philosophy, because it will influence the future.
Yeah, I was also thinking about that topic more in the sense of how philosophy will develop into the future and what it's going to look like. Right.
Like, it is important to study philosophy because it'll affect you in the future.
Definitely.
Yeah, and how will it do that?
So, do you want to talk about tech and science first, or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I was saying that philosophy is going to become huge, like absolutely all-powering in the future, because it will be a big influence in scientific and technological progress and advancement. Because we're getting to the point where things cannot be done for ethical reasons, and that that's how philosophy is going to become like one of the biggest things. I mean, it's always kind of been the biggest thing, but it will definitely become more urgent and immediate to us.
Yeah. Can you expand on what you mean by you can't do things for ethical reasons?
Right? Like that. There are so many debates in science right now of whether or not progress is inherently good. Like, for example, genetic modification and eugenics. Like, is it morally and ethically correct to make a baby, like, get rid of its malformations before birth? Because there are ethical arguments against that. There are ethical arguments that it is a slippery slope and it'll develop into something dystopian, and that is what is keeping science from progressing. So yeah.
So, in that sense, it seems like you're trying to say that tech and science are encountering these philosophical questions that we've been putting off, in a sense. But
yeah, in a sense, well, they've just kind of always been there, but now they've become like
important.
Super immediate to us. Like, we have to address them right now.
And like, that's actually the thing, because like philosophy is very notorious for never coming to any conclusions. So like, that's not the kind of philosophy we're going to be talking on this kind of podcast. Well, yeah,
kind of it is.
Yeah, kind of is. Yeah. But I mean, like, all we're trying to do is like explain these concepts in a way that you can have your own ideas on them and whatnot. But generally, philosophy usually don't come to any kind of conclusion because...
Right. It's all question.
And what is really cool about that is, like, with tech and science, when you're creating something or developing something, not necessarily for science, but for developing something, you have to inherently put a bias into how that thing is going to work and what success is for that thing. So, like, for example, if you're building a bridge, like, you're going to have a defined measure of success, making sure that it works as properly as possible, making sure that it doesn't... But
would you say that's a bias, though?
Necessarily, because let's say that there was this really Nazi kind of dude, right? Nazi kind of dude building a bridge or whatever, right? If they found a way to make sure that all blonde, blue people
that's
only
kind
cross
of
over.
Extreme. Like, do you think there's necessarily bias? Because
I don't think there's any necessary bias in the science. right? But I believe that when you are building a product, you inject objective bias to a point where you're trying to define success in that sense.
That's interesting. Also, can I talk about, you said that philosophy doesn't ever really come to a conclusion. Sorry, this is like going way back, but I'm gonna have to disagree with that, because there are so many, like that's the whole point of philosophical texts. They're like trying to tell us, that's that's the thing with ethics, like Kant wrote a bunch of texts about what you should do, and that is his conclusion, like what is ethically correct and why. And so I'd say that's a conclusion.
Yeah, but conclusions that can be, because it's like with philosophy, it's not like it's a science that it's telling you the world the way that it is. It's like personal conclusions come from different philosophical reasonings and whatever, if you know what I mean. So it's like with Kant, there's many people that can disagree with him in certain aspects of his thinking and whatever, and we can't necessarily say that they're wrong.
I see what you mean. So it's not that conclusions don't exist, it's that they're never going to be considered as truly absolute.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, got it. Cool.
But just sort of disclaimer on that, there are some concepts in philosophy that are generally widely accepted in realms of philosophy, like objective morality versus subjective morality. Most people don't believe in objective morality, but again, if you can reasonably justify that position, then it's a good position to take in that case.
Yeah.
But yeah.
For sure. Yeah, do you want to talk about how philosophy is going to affect the future socially?
That's going to be really cool. Talking about future of social interactions, this is something that I've been thinking about for some time, like social media and how we can think about philosophy in that context. It's like, how are we going to carry out the conversations of the future? Because right now, the way that we discuss is just being like, I believe X, I believe Y, that is an opinion, deal with it. I mean, like...
That's not always true, but I can see what you mean. You think that's going to change in the future?
I believe it needs to change in the future if we actually want to have a functioning society.
What do you propose?
I'd say that first things first, public social media would be interesting to have, I believe, in the sense that having a social media platform that isn't beholden to, economic forces is going to be really important for developing...
Do you think that's at all possible?
Right now, probably not.
There are arguments that it's like inherently impossible.
Can you...
That social media just is not going to be influenced by economics at all. Yeah, there are arguments that that's inherently impossible because economics influence everything. Like, it's become too fundamental part of society that to cleanse anything of it.
This is a really interesting topic that we should probably go into another podcast
on a whole different episode.
Yeah. But to quickly summarize my thoughts on that, I feel like to distance ourselves from, like, it's going to be an inherent thing that we need to do, where we need to distance ourselves from thinking that economics is all that we are, and we need to develop society as what it was meant to be, where when you're in a society, you're trying to make it better, you're trying to make life better for yourself, in a sense.
I see.
It's like, and we should try and focus on that more of the definition of society.
So you're suggesting an enlightenment.
Yeah, and I feel like it's going to come a lot sooner rather than later, because like on another podcast, we can talk about like what AI does about the future of work and whatnot. But I feel like we are being pushed to the point where we are going to be separated from our work, more likely than not.
Yeah.
And we need to somehow reconcile that with our thoughts about how we should live in this world.
I see. Yeah, that makes total sense. I just want to mention, this episode is like super abstract,
super
compared to
abstract.
probably what it's gonna be, just because it's like a really broad topic. But
And it's like our first podcast, so we need to explain how we think and whatnot.
Yeah. But yeah, that makes sense. How do you think it'll affect us personally, and how do you think that will reflect on how philosophy in the future will affect us socially? Do you think it'll be a direct correlation, or do you think like something will happen that separates your personal thoughts from your actions and interactions in the society?
Can you simplify that question for me?
Yeah, that was a really complicated question. I kind of don't understand it myself. But well, first of all, how do you think philosophy will affect our individual intellectual thoughts in the future?
I believe that philosophy is going to be a huge factor in how we think about life and how
good catch there.
Good catch there. Should be a huge factor about how we think about life and how we think about ourselves. And once we do that, then it's going to value our relationship with other people more, in the sense that once we understand ourselves, then we can understand what we want from other people and what we like should get, I believe. I don't know how to explain that well, but
what we want from other people and what we should get. Yeah, that makes sense. But don't you think that's how it already is?
not necessarily, because like right now there's like not necessarily an inherent...
Well, that's an interesting... Like, do you think people will become more intellectual? Like, people become more enlightened. In air quotations, about things like that? Like, because what I might be completely wrong, but what I'm understanding is that it will influence the future because people will continue to think and then they will realize that. But that's not necessarily what is going to happen.
Well, I view it in a different way, in the sense that it's going to affect the future in the sense that that's basically the only thing that we're going to be able to do, in the sense that like with work, we're not going to be distracted by that as much.
Are you sure?
Again, really interesting podcast.
In the complete opposite direction.
Complete opposite
that
direction.
Work is just going to dominate everything.
I'd say that right now work is dominating everything in our lives. Like when you're growing up or whatever, you think about jobs and think about, oh, what kind of job am I going to get? A lot of people define their lives around the job that they will get in the future. But I believe that eventually that is not going to be the main factor of what people believe, but more in the sense of how they think about different kinds of stuff is what they're going to say. Oh, how am I going to see this? What am I going to explore next? You know, like
I see.
Seeing themselves as like an ever-evolving creature instead of like a job or like as a specific thing in the future.
Yeah, well, that could happen or it could not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of realizing that we're like running into an issue where like we're kind of disagreeing on whether or not philosophy will affect the future at all. Like, I think, well, obviously it'll affect the future, but whether or not it'll become more of a dominant thing than it was, or if it's possible to even become more or less, like, is it just constant? Or, because I think there's always the debate of like whether people will become more or less intellectual, and whether or not that actually has to do directly with philosophy, I guess that's my question. But we can get into that on a later episode.
Amazing.
Yep.
We're just setting up so many episodes. Podcast.
Yeah, that's kind of what happens when you do a philosophy podcast.
Pretty much.
But yeah, do you want to
summarize what we've gone over?
Yeah, sure. Just like wrap everything up.
So today we discussed about philosophy and what it is and why we should study it. Yeah,
it was a very tip of the iceberg thing.
Yeah, and we
had a lot to cover.
Yeah, and we sort of went in like different directions, like sprouting off this. But I mean, like that's sort of the point of philosophy.
Kind of point.
Because like in philosophy, there's at the very beginning, anyways, there used to be so many different things, and it covered generally about knowledge and whatnot, and like philo, love, and Sophia, wisdom. So like love of wisdom. So just having fun, talking about different stuff is sort of what we do.
It can get very
very intense. However.
Yeah.
So hopefully you guys understood what we talked about, and hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a question that you wanted to leave off with?
Oh yeah.
Do you want to start that on the next episode or something?
Nah, it's fine. I can do it here. So I want you guys to think about how can you use philosophy in your daily lives? Like, where do you see it come up most often, and like where it's the most important for you? So yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool. Well, thanks guys for listening.
Thanks so much for listening.
Oh, and sources are in the description.
That is correct.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye guys.